Hello, Steve White, Steve Arts 89. I want to talk about the Clairmont murders, the actual case and the film. I recently saw a two-part documentary called Clairmont, The Killer Among Us, and then a couple of days later, that was on 10 Plus, a couple of days later on 7 Plus, I stumbled across a movie based on the crime. And it was a two-part movie with an hour 20 for each part, so about 2 hours 40 minutes. They really did a good job of covering the whole case. It was a solid production, good acting, good performances. The only actor I really recognised was Kate Ritchie, who played a character on Home and Away when I was growing up. So it was interesting to see her as an adult playing the mother of one of the victims. Now, the case itself is very frustrating. Like the film, it starts in 1988, but it really doesn't become known and become the Clairmont, serial killer Clairmont murders case until 1996. So this guy started off in his neighbourhood just being a nuisance, stealing women's underwear, wearing women's clothes and sneaking into people's houses and scaring them, wearing underwear on his head and ridiculous things like that. But then eventually that wasn't taken seriously, and then eventually he started to assault women, and no one knew who it was. And then eventually he graduated to sexually assaulting and then murdering women. The first woman, he left her for dead. He kidnapped her. He offered her a ride. He kidnapped her. He took her to a cemetery. He sexually assaulted her, and then he left her for dead. I think he thought he killed her. I'm not exactly sure, but she escaped, and it wasn't really investigated. They didn't really pay much attention to it, and nothing happened about it. Then about a year later, Australia Day 1996, so January 26, 1996, which is the day I remember because that's my birthday as well, and it's the birthday of this character who goes out to celebrate her birthday, and she goes to get a taxi on the way home and is never seen again. Now, about a year later, St. Patrick's Day 1997, which I also remember, another girl goes missing, leaving the same hotel, the Continental Hotel in Clairmont, or club in Clairmont. And then a year later, another woman goes missing, and they're all around the same age. They're all leaving the same hotel or club, the Continental Hotel, sorry. And they're never seen again. Now, two of the bodies are found, but the second woman, Sarah, her body's never found. And they set up a task force. They're aware that this is a serial killer. They're in contact with the media. It's a public investigation. Everyone's following it. Everyone is sort of fixated on what's happening because this is a big deal in Perth, in Western Australia. Was it Perth? Western Australia, I don't know. I had a friend from Perth who told me about this case back in the day because I hadn't heard a lot about it in Melbourne and Sydney. I don't think it got as much press and attention, but it was a big deal in Western Australia. And, people, were afraid to go out. It sort of affected the nightlife and the culture for a while, and it was never solved for the longest time. Like for 2 decades, it went as a cold case, after the third murder in 1998, and it wasn't until 2008 that another team came on and were able to look at it objectively, because unfortunately the police got tunnel vision. They found a man who fit the very cliched, basic profile perfectly, and they just set their eyes on him, and they didn't really consider anyone else. They were convinced it was him, and they were just convinced of getting him. They harassed this guy for years. They followed this guy for years. They trailed this guy for years. He couldn't go anywhere, do anything. They profiled him in the media, ruined this guy's life, causing great mental distress and affected his mental health. And he wasn't guilty. He wasn't the guy who did it. He claimed that he was following girls in his car because he saw them out at night going home alone, and because there was a serial killer out there, he was basically just trying to watch them and make sure they went home. They got home safely. They didn't get picked up or abducted or anything. And as far as we can tell, that's what he was actually doing. He was telling the truth, but they didn't believe him. They thought he was just looking for the next victim, and they never really considered anything else at that point. They really stopped investigating. And then it all shut down, and it got set up again. And some of the people who were involved actually came back on, but they were able to get past what they originally thought because they really wanted to solve the case. And they did manage to do that. They found themselves around some of the roadblocks that they'd sort of set up with focusing on the wrong person. And also some of the DNA evidence they couldn't have tested back in the 80s and even the 90s, they were able to test in 2008. So 20 years later, 20 years after the last murder, they found a DNA match for the man who did it. And they were able to get enough evidence, because it all came together, everything started to click together, and this man had actually been brought to their attention indirectly because other victims of this guy had come forward and said, I believe the person who assaulted me is responsible for this, but they couldn't prove who it was. So this was the first time he came up. He didn't come up in any of the searches or investigation or anything, because when he did attack a woman years before, and this was a premeditated, attempted sexual assault and possible murder, he worked for Telecom, which was sort of the earlier version of Telstra, which is one of Australia's main telephone companies. And he went out to a job, and he went prepared with ropes and gear, and he excused himself to the bathroom, and then he came out ready to assault this woman. She managed to fight him off, and no one took it seriously. They did not recognise it as an attempted sexual assault and possible murder, and no one took it seriously, and she ended up leaving that industry because she couldn't believe how they'd swept under the rug. And they basically would just say, oh, this poor guy, he's had such a bad breakup from his horrible girlfriend, and he just lashed out at someone. He's such a nice guy, he just had a bad moment, and they just made all these excuses for him. And it's unbelievable that they treated it that way. In hindsight, I really, even if you didn't know this guy ended up becoming a serial killer, just that case alone, that they treated it that way is just really shocking and really frustrating when you see, where it led. Had they recorded it properly and processed it properly, this guy would have came up after the first murder, and he would have been one of the suspects, and he wouldn't have been able to commit the other crimes because he would have been under the radar and it wouldn't have happened. So if the police hadn't failed the first time, the later murders wouldn't have happened. But yeah, so they find him, they arrest him, he's charged. It's a bit iffy with some of the evidence because there's just all the time and history in that, but they actually managed to get a conviction. He gets a life sentence. But unfortunately, even though he gets a life sentence and he's got nothing to lose, he doesn't ever reveal to the parents of the second girl that went missing. They never found the body. He never told them where to find the body, so they never recovered the body. They never had real closure. And that's the sad part and the tragedy of the story, that the two of the three victims, their bodies were found, the family was able to have sort of closure on one level, but the other family didn't. And they didn't even have the satisfaction of the man being found guilty for the murder, because they couldn't, without the body, they couldn't find enough evidence to prove. The judge went out of his way to say, I believe that he did this, but we can't prove it, so we can't include that charge. But yeah, so it was just interesting to see how it all unfolded, and the movie did a great job, as far as I can tell from what I learned from the documentary, of depicting what happened and how it happened and why it happened. And they do a good job of showing the police officer's side and the family's side, and they also sort of show the family of the killer, and they do a good job of portraying him as just pathetic. They don't really make any excuses for him. There's not a lot of sympathy for him, which is good, because I don't understand why he got sympathy in the first place and why they didn't treat this as the crime it was when he first started assaulting women, because it wouldn't have escalated to where it did. But it was a fairly big case, a fairly important case, and it deserved a film. And I just hope that over time, all the sort of big stories, Australian stories, get their own movies. They seem to be working on doing one or two of these movies a year. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, see it. It's good. It's fascinating, and I'm glad I'd seen that two-part documentary and a couple other documentaries before that about the Clairmont case. I only looked into it in the last few months, because I'd heard about it, like I said, years ago, but it just wasn't a case that was something I heard about a lot in Melbourne. So it was interesting, and I was surprised that it didn't get the sort of consistent national attention I think it deserved. But I'm going to go. Feel free to share, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think. This was meant to be a 5-minute review. I tried a couple of times, and I couldn't do it. And I'm just going to let it go as long as it needs to be, because it's a complicated case, and I have a few feelings about it. And now I'm done. Bye.